Let's begin. So we've been talking about what are the circumstances under which one would be allowed to go through water on Yom Kippur. Even the main focus being, even though one might think that's not permitted because it would be like Rechitza. But what we found out is that you're allowed to go through water for certain intents and purposes. Among them are going to read somebody to whom you owe kavod. Wait a second. I keep doing something. Oh, there it is. Somebody to whom you owe kavod, like your Rebbe, your Rav Muvak, or your father, or even somebody who's greater than you in Torah. And then we have this discussion about, is it permissible for the Rebbe to go through water to see his student on Yom Kippur? And we couldn't adduce a proof for that. We had a proof which got shot down. So then we had another case.
It was shot down on factual grounds, but not on matters of, yes, shot down just on factual grounds.
What do you mean by factual grounds?
Meaning that, it was, based on, what's the term, Maseh Rabbanim or?
Maseh Rav.
Maseh Rav. And so there was, he was seen to be doing something else, to be passing the water in order to greet his students. And then, if I recall, and then somebody else said, no, he actually is the other way around.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I see what you mean by factual grounds. Well, or to put it differently, we don't have a proof. That's the way it comes out in the Gemara, right? So we don't have a proof. Then we talked about the idea of going to guard one's fruits, which we said is permitted. And what we summarized so far is that if you're going to a shir on Yom Kippur, so Rav Yosef says you're allowed to go and return on Yom Kippur, so you can go back through the water again, even though on the way back you're not going to learn, so there is no mitzvah per se involved, but he lets you go to and back, to and fro, there and back, in order not to essentially keep you from doing it the next time. In other words, it's to encourage you to go to the shir, that you'll know that if you want to, you can return. We did not have such a statement regarding going to guard one's fruits. So the implication is that you're allowed to go through water to guard your fruit, but you wouldn't be allowed to return. And we also don't have a statement regarding going through water to greet your father or your Rebbe or somebody who's greater than you. We'll have to get back to that. So then we had this Maseh. Rav Yehuda, Rav Shmuel bar Rav Yehuda. Havukaimi aguda de nahar prat amabra de chatstad. So Rav Yehuda and Rav Shmuel bar Yehuda, they were on one side of the river, either the river Papa or the river Prat, depending on which girsa. At this place where one would go through to get to Chatzdad. And Rami Bar Papa was on the other side of the river, and he called out to them, what is the din? Would it be permissible for me to cross the river to you in order to ask you about a point of learning? So Rav Yehuda quotes Rav and Shmuel the Amri Tarvayo. Rav, he says, so I pointed out last time, Rav Yehuda was a student of both Rav and Shmuel. And you probably know from learning in other contexts that Rav and Shmuel were, but they were brei plukta. They were people that we often bring up as people who argue the point of halacha. So so we have many examples of that throughout Mishnah and Gemara, right? People who were gedolim in their generation who often disagreed on points of halacha. For example, when we began the sugya, we had Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish, and you also have like the Zugot and Avot, which include Hillel and Shammai. You have many, many examples of this. So in the Gemara, whenever you have a case where the two people who often argue agree, so this is how the statement is introduced. Ravu Shmuel da Amri Tarvayu, that they both say. So why do we say they both say? Because normally they wouldn't both say. Normally they wouldn't both agree. But in this case, they both agree. So he can go through, provided he doesn't take his hand out from under the seam of his garment. Ikeda Amri. Some people say, Amarle Rav Shmuel bar Rav Yehuda. Some people say that it wasn't Rav Yehuda who replied in the name of Rav and Shmuel. Some people said it was Rav Shmuel bar Rav Yehuda, who was the other Rav at the other side of the river. And he replied, Tanina, we learned it in a Braita, Over uvilvat shel yotzi yado mitachat chayfet chalukah. So practically it's the same thing, except that in the second iteration, it's from a Braita. In the first iteration, it's from Rav and Shmuel. Now, is there a difference between saying something's from Rav and Shmuel as opposed to a Braita?
The Braita is older.
The Braita is older, so does that give it more halachic weight or less halachic weight?
I would think the fact that it's a Baraita would suggest that it has less weight, maybe. I mean, if it's earlier, it would have more weight. But the fact that it's a Baraita rather than a Mishnah would maybe suggest that it has less weight. Is that?
Well, but we're comparing it to a statement of Rav and Shmuel. We're not comparing it to a Mishnah.
Okay, fair enough. So yes, it would have more weight if it's older.
Okay, so presumably, right, so I'll just point this out, right? Presumably, the Braita has more weight, right? A Tanaitic statement has more weight than a statement from Amoraim. Even Rab and Shmuel, who were both first generation Amoraim, they were both students of Rabbi Yehuda and Nasi. But you should also bear in mind that when it comes to Psak Halacha, the general rule is halacha kebatrai. Halacha is like the later ones. There's an idea that when you have machlokets amongst Amoraim, that whoever is latest gets the last word. Excuse me. In other words, the logic is the logic is simply that the logic is that the later ones, whoever is later historically, saw whatever came before and decided however they decided. So they have the benefit of whatever the earlier psak was. So this is a bit of a digression, but here this is how we would have to look at it. That we would say that when it's a machloket Amoraim, for example, but we also know Amoraim couldn't disagree with Tanaim. It was an accepted rule that an Amora can't disagree with a Tana. And whenever the Gemara sees an Amora who disagrees with the Tana, either they'll be rejected, either their opinion will be rejected because they disagree with the Tana, or the Gemara has to adduce another Tana to support the Amora. So here we have Rav. Here it all works out very neatly because we have both Rav and Shmuel agreeing, and then we have another source in the Ikadamre. We have a Braita, which agrees with Rav and Shmuel, right? Which seems to be maybe the source of Rav and Shmuel. So it was Rav and Shmuel who saw that Braita, and they both agreed that there was no reason to disagree with that Braita, and they didn't have an alternate tradition, so this is how they paskin. In any event, I want to take a moment just to delve into this situation of somebody who's crossing through water, and this idea of not taking their hand out from under their garment. So first of all, in the context of what we were just saying, so right before this Maaseh with Rami Bar Papa and Rav Yehuda and Rav Shmuel Bar Rav Yehuda, so we were having this discussion about what are the times, under what circumstances is somebody allowed to cross the river on Yom Kippur. So this is following on that. It's following up on that discussion. So before we got to this Maaseh, we already knew that the Talmud is allowed to go to the Rebbe on Yom Kippurim, and here what we're saying specifically is he's allowed to pass through the water even just to ask a shaila of sorts. Excuse me. So all of that fits in. That seems to fit in. But now we have another, so what do we gain from this story? We gain this extra condition that uvavat shelo yotzi yado mitachat chefet chaluko. He's allowed to go through water provided he doesn't take his hand out from under his garment. So what does that mean exactly? So Rashi says, mitachat chefet sfat chaluko. The chefet is the hem of the garment. And what does it mean not to take his hand out from underneath the hem? Lahagbiya shulei chaluko al zro'o. It would be to lift the bottom of the garment onto his arm. De'eno nireh kemalbush. If he does that, it no longer looks like a garment. It doesn't look like something he's wearing. It would be just like if he was carrying it on his shoulder. Yamar mar hayotze betalit mikuperet al ktefo b'Shabbat chayav chatan. Somebody who goes with a folded garment on their shoulder on Shabbat is chayav chatat. So how do you understand Rashi? How does Rashi seem to understand this condition of not going out, going through the water as long as you don't take your hand out from underneath your garment?
Oh, it's a problem of tiltul for Rashi.
So not tiltul, not tiltul is we say the gabe muktzah. So it's only moving from place to place, but the idea it likes to move something that's muktzah from place to place. But the idea is, yes, the idea is that you're not allowed. It would be like carrying on Shabbat, carrying more than Daled Amot on Shabbat, and one is not allowed to do. So we know that one is not allowed to do that. What's the chidush of this particular example? What's different about this example than stam carrying?
It's about the appearance of carrying.
It's about the appearance of carrying, because why isn't he really carrying?
Because he's wearing the garment.
Because he's wearing the garment. He's actually wearing the garment, but we'll look for a moment at the example that Rashi brings. Just a second. Let me just show you. I think it might have been Paul last time who alluded to this question. The question is it forbidden to carry in the river? So the basis for the different, we have different domains on Shabbat. We have 4 domains on Shabbat, Arba Rishuyot. The basis for that is from this Tosefta here. It's the very first Tosefta in Masechet Shabbat. And it's also brought down in the Gemara and Daf Vav, the Gemara and Shabbos. But here I'll read it from the Tosefta. Arba Rishuyot. Oh, wait 1 second. Did we share that? No, you don't see it. Now you should see it. There we go. Arba Rishuyot, there are 4 Rishuyot. Rishuta Yachid, Rishuta Rabim. So the Tana starts off with the first 2. The first 2 we understand are the Oraita. That based on the Torah really only discusses, as it were, that only recognizes 2 Rishuyot on Shabbat. Ezehu Rishuta Yachid, Charit Shamok Asara, V'Rachav Arba'a. Rishuta Yachid would be like a trench that's 10 tfachim deep and 4 tfachim wide. In other words, it's a minimum. Similarly, if you had a fence that was 10 tfachim high and 4 wide, so the idea of the Rishuta Yachid is it's a place that's limited by either by a fence if it's above ground, or if it's dug into the ground, but it's at least 4 tfachim by 10 tfachim. When we say 4 by 10, we mean it has to be at least 10 tfachim high and at least 4 tfachim wide. Ezehu Rishuta Rabim. So what's a Reshut Rabim? Srati uplatia gdola. Muvuot hamefulashin. Zohi Reshut Rabim gemura. So what is a Reshut Rabim? A sratia, which is like a highway, or a platia, which would be like an open space within a town, like a plaza. It doesn't here in this Braita, the Tosefta doesn't give us the exact shiurim for this. And mivo'ota mefulashin, and the like the alleys that are open on two sides. This is a Reshut Rabim Gemura. Ein motzin right? So ein motzin mireshut yachid zu Reshut Rabim zu, ve'ein machlisin mireshut Rabim zu Reshut yachid zu. So the din Torah is you're not allowed to take from Reshut yachid to Reshut Rabim and vice versa. V'motzi v'hichnis b'shogeg chayav chatat, v'mezid anush karet v'niskal. Michael Werner, I'm losing you already.
Sorry.
No, I didn't know what you can do. I know that it's hard for you, but I feel like as soon as I start talking, I lose you.
No, it's not you. I mean, I'm working 4 jobs right now. I've been going since about 7 a.m.
Oh, okay. So
Yeah.
I
sorry.
understand. No, I don't take it personally. I don't want you to miss so much.
And actually, you nudge me awake. I wake up instantly. So I know it's a nuisance for you, but it actually, yeah. It is coming in as long as I'm not completely gone.
Yeah, you missed my discussion about sleep with Michael Schwartz earlier, so I'm completely sympathetic.
It's a topic that is dear to my heart.
Right, so however you transfer from one domain to another, you're chayav. Then we get here, aval hayam, v'habika, v'hakarmelit, v'ha'istavanit, v'haskupa, einan lo reshuta yachid, v'lo reshuta rabim. So there's certain places which don't fall into either category. And they're listed here. I'm not going to go deeply into all of them, but the first one we notice is Yam, sea, or in other words, the idea is a body of water. So body of water is not technically either a Reshuta Yachid or a Reshuta Rabim. It falls into this category of Carmelite. Here, Carmelite is listed as a separate thing. Again, I won't go into it, but all of these examples are what the Gemara calls Carmelite. So Carmelite is like, it has characteristics that are like a Reshuta Yachid. And if we think broadly that the idea of the Reshuta Yachid is a place, like a Reshuta Rabim. The basic characteristic of let's say, Reshuta Rabim is a place where the Rabim go. It's a place where the masses walk around. How it gets defined further, right? So it says kagon tzrati uplatia. So we learn out from the Gemara that it has to be 16 amot wide. It has to be at least 16 amot wide. It's also only up to 10 tfachim, the other mafyanim, and then you get into this interesting phenomenon where it's implied from some of the Rishonim that it also has to be a place where 600,000 people walk every day. That is, it's a place, it would be a place like Machane Yisrael, right? Machane Yisrael, we know that there were at least 600,000 people because we have these censuses in the Torah, and we know that there are at least 600,000 adult men. So we assume that at least 600,000 people go into the Reshuta Rabim every day. I'm just mentioning that it's not so pertinent to our discussion, but God willing, someday we'll learn Masechet Shabbat and we'll get into it. But I will point out that particular, you may have learned this, that particular characteristic is actually not mentioned anywhere in the the Mishnah Tosefta of the Gemara. It's not mentioned in Chazal, and it's because of that. It's a bit controversial. For our purposes, we have this idea that the Carmelites is also a space where maybe it's some kind of a public space. That when we think of the Reshut Yachid, the very name that we give it, the Reshut Yachid, implies that it's just for the individual. It's a private space, as opposed to the Reshut Rabim. It's a place where the public goes. But that's not enough, and so we see already in the Braita that you have to also give it dimensions. You have to give it physical dimensions. So the fact is, the Braita gives physical dimensions to the Reshut Yachid. Presumably, those are the minimal dimensions. That has to be at least 10 tefachim high, and has to be at least 4 tefachim wide. It doesn't say how long, but let's say it would have to be then at least 4 by 4. 10 tefachim high and 4. It's actually 10 tefachim by 4 amot. The Reshut Yachid, it doesn't give us dimensions. But the assumption of the Reshut Rabim is that it must be much bigger, because that's where a lot of people go. So, but we know in reality the world is not actually divided up so neatly, and we have these things. You have bodies of water, you have a bikat, right, a valley. In other words, it's an open valley that even though maybe it's surrounded, maybe it's also limited by mountains on either side. It also might be a very narrow space, but it's not really a Reshut Yachid, etc.
Shane, excuse me. These dimensions are the dimensions of the place or of the divider?
Of the place or the what?
Or the divider, the wall which makes the division between. Because I don't understand, because an eruv is just a wire, and it has almost no dimension.
Okay, so we won't get into the eruv, but even though the way we make these eruvin nowadays, right, it's a wire, but from the halachic point of view, it's like a wall. Each of those is like a wall. But the way you have some you have probably some understanding of this from dinim of sukkah, right? So a sukkah is let's say theoretically the ideal sukkah is 4 walls with an entryway. But you can also make it 3 walls. You can also make it 2.5 walls, and you can make it. You can, as long as it's 10 tefachim high, but we consider as if it, and your schach maybe is a couple more meters above that, but we consider as if the whole wall is filled out, right? So we have like Rav Savitsky, Zichrono Livracha, was told me the joke that the guy goes to his Rav in the morning of Sukkot, and he's all upset, and the Rav asks what's wrong. He said, somebody broke into my sukkah and stole all the food that I had left there. He says, so what do you mean? Like, what happened? He says, I don't understand how they could do it. It was a complete sukkah. He said, what do you mean it was a complete sukkah? Well, I mean, I had this open space here, and I had, in other words, but halachically it was a closed space. But it turns out that there were 3 tefachim at the bottom, and there were a few tefachim at the top, but he says, I don't understand how they could get through. Anyway, I'm telling it well because I think you get the idea.
So somebody who walks into sukkah, even though it walks in sukkah, then would be guilty of breaking and entering, even if he didn't, even if it was effectively an open door.
Well, yeah, I mean, in other words, the point is that the sukkah by definition is also a kind of Reshut Yachid. the dimensions are not necessarily the same as a Reshut Yachid, but for the let's say for the most part, it's a Reshut Yachid. About whether or not you're allowed to walk into somebody else's sukkah actually gets into other questions. But let's say you're not allowed to go in and steal other things, things from the sukkah, which is what happened. Anyway, okay, I'm sorry that.
Well, we had, when our children were small, we had a dog. And the dog went into the sukkah through the side walls.
Right. Your dog didn't understand the halacha that was a solid wall. He didn't know.
So your dog was decidedly a Yotzi Dauphin.
Oh, yeah, fair.
Nichnas Dauphin.
He was a Nichnas Dauphin, right? And afterwards, he was a Yotzei Dauphin. Very good. Okay, so we have these reshuyot that they're neither here nor there, which is the Carmelit, and we also there's another kind of reshut, which is the makom patur. The makom patur is spaces in the reshut rabim or in the Carmelit that are above 10 tvachim, right? So when we talk about the Reshut Yachid, it's defined as being at least 10 tvachim high. But once you have walls that are 10 tvachim high, or have some kind of definition of being 10 tvachim high, then it's a Reshut Yachid ad hashamayim. The Reshut Yachid goes all the way, continually up. But the Reshut Rabim is actually only up to 10 tvachim. Anything above 10 tvachim is not technically part of the Reshut Rabim. It's in a makom patur. So the din is that the Carmelit is like a Reshut Rabim midurabanan. It's like a Reshut Rabim midurabanan. So if you take from a Reshut Yachid into a Carmelit, or vice versa, you're over Nisur D'Rabanan. And the Makom Patur we call it a Makom Patur because if you take from another Reshut into a Makom Patur, or vice versa, you're Patur L'Gamre. Right? It's not considered to be Ma'avir Me Reshut to Reshut. So this is talking about, so far we're talking about Hotza'ava the Hachnasa, right? Taking something into, like, from one Reshut to another, or taking something out of one Reshut to another. But Huadin, within a Reshut Rabim or within a Carmelit, one is not allowed to carry more than 4 amot. So if you pick something up on the sidewalk that's in a Reshut Rabim, if you carry it less than 4 amot and put it down, then you're not over midioraita on Ma'avir be Reshut Rabim. The Huadin for Carmelit. We treat the Carmelit the same as the Reshut Rabim in principle, right? So there'll be differences because the Carmelit is a Reshut D'Rabanan and the Reshut Rabim is a Reshut D'Oraita. But the Kitzur, we consider them l'chatchila to essentially be the same. So I wanted to show you that because I think, as I say, I think it was Paul maybe who asked about this last time. In the story that we're doing in the Gemara, we're talking about people walking through water on Yom HaKippurim. So now we have this, according to Rashi, we have this issue, the way Rashi understands the Gemara, that one is not allowed to take their hand from under their garment. So what would be the problem? So Rashi seems to envision that you have a garment that's like a robe, and if you take your hand from under the garment, you would do that in order to lift the robe. And so once you lift the robe, then, as Michael Warner said, then it's like you're carrying it it's similar to carrying it, even though you're wearing it. You're still wearing it, but now you're not wearing it on your body the way that one would normally wear that garment. So let's say part of it might be draped over your shoulders, but the rest of it you're carrying. So the way Rashi put it, just to get back for a second to what Rashi said, right? He says, "Svat chaluko lagbia shulei chaluko al zro'o." Rashi envisions you carrying it on your arm, right? You've lifted it up, like you lift up the hem and you're carrying it on your arm. Because then eino nireh kemalbush, then it no longer looks like a garment. Rather, it's like carrying it on your shoulder. Why does he use the example of carrying on your shoulder? Because he tells you why. Because that's the way the Gemara talks about it. Let's take a brief look at that Gemara, because the way he quotes it, it's not 100. You have to see it a little bit in context. Let's see how it looks in context. Right, so here we go. This Gemara, the Amud starts with someone who shakes out their talit on Shabbat is chayav chatat. What does it mean? Rashi explains min ha'afar. So if you have a dirty talit, and again, talit here is lav dafka the talis that you wear in shul. Talit is a garment. Talit stam is a garment. If you shake out your garment on Shabbat, you chayav a chatat. Why would be chayav a chatat? So it sounds it's extreme, right? But the idea is if you have a dirty garment and you would shake it out, the way I imagine this is if you shake it out in a vigorous way to clean it, then it's like you're cleaning it. And cleaning, right? Cleaning your clothes on Shabbat is asur.
To me, given how Rashi speaks of it, my sense is that just maybe I'm going out on a limb here, but it actually creates the impression of caring. Basically, you like this garment was.
No, but that's not what we're talking about yet. We're not talking about caring. This is even if you're in your home.
Okay.
Even if you're in your shut, right? Right?
Okay.
If you're shaking it out, then you're chayav chatat. Rashi says the zehu libulna. Right, this is its cleaning. That's the way you clean it. Just bear in that, this is actually. I'm only quoting this because we're not even going to read the whole thing, but I want to get to the part that's more relevant. But I'm quoting it just to show you we're talking here a little bit about garments. This is how it comes out. This is part of the context. In terms of shaking out a garment and being chayav chatat for cleaning it, bear in mind that until we had dry cleaning, people people who had much fewer garments until relatively recently in history. You maybe only had 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 garments that you owned. You didn't wash them, didn't launder them in water frequently the way we do now because we have washing machines. And one of the ways that you would launder them would be to vigorously shake it out, or to take a brush to it and brush it very well, right? These were ways of keeping your clothes clean. There's a certain mindset that we have regarding the way we keep our clothes clean, which is very, very modern, and it was not necessarily the way people did things in older times. Anyway, we only say that regarding a new garment, but if it's an old garment, then we have not with it. In other words, we don't care. We only say it also about a dark garment, but if it's a light garment or a reddish garment, then we don't care. And that's if the owner is makbid, that he won't wear them until they've been shaken out and cleaned. All right, anyway, I'm going to leave this. I'm going to move on a little bit. A little bit further on in the Gemara, Rav Yitzchak bar Yosef and Rav Yochanan, Hayotzei betalit mikupelet, munachat lo aktefo b'Shabbat, chayav chatat. I always think it must be funny for people who grew up in Israel to see this word mikupelet, which is it's a candy, if you're familiar. But anyway, Rav Yitzchak bar Yosef says in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, if one goes out, meaning if you go out on Shabbat with a talit that's folded and placed on the shoulder on Shabbat, you're chayav chatat. So I want you to understand that in the context here of the Gemara, we're not talking about somebody who took a garment and put it on their shoulder. We're talking about somebody who's wearing a garment that gets folded up onto their shoulder. I skipped part of this, but we're just gonna look at this part here. And Rashi,
but this is what we are doing. We just put it on the shoulders, the talit after.
No, but
that's the way.
Again, אנחנו לא מדברים על talit שאנחנו לובשים לתפילה. Talit here is stam, it's a garment, right? It's a malbush koshu. So what's the talit mekupelet? Rashi says, "B'talit mekupelet liachar shenatna al rosha higbiya shipuleh al ktefav." We're talking about a kind of garment that they would have worn, where it would be on their head and then draped over the body. So lo rachok mima shenachnu loshim, right? So it's not dissimilar to a talis that we wear in shul, but it was kind of a garment that people wore every day just to go out, when they went out. But what's the point? You have this garment that's supposed to go, it's like a kfiyah, but it goes over your whole body, right? So it's attached onto your head, and then it's draped over the rest of your body. So yotzei b'talit mekupelet, munachat al ktefo. So let's say you have this garment, but then you fold up from the bottom hem and you rest the whole thing on your shoulders, not just the sides. You bring up the whole thing and put the whole thing on your shoulders. If you walk out like that on Shabbat, then you're chayav chatat. Why? Rashi says, she'ein ze derech malbush. You're not wearing it the way you would wear a garment. When you wear a garment, you have to wear the garment. So the mere fact that this has, halachic implications now. Like, if you're, I don't know, if you go out in a long coat, but you lift up the coat and throw, let's say you just drape it over your shoulders and throw the rest of it over your shoulders, that's carrying. If you have a coat, you have to wear it as a coat, assuming you're walking in a place that doesn't have an eruv. Just because it's a garment, and just because it happens to be on your body, that doesn't mean you're wearing it. Wearing it is going to be defined by the way you would normally wear that garment. So here we have a case of talita mikupelet shnachat al ktefo, where you have it, let's say some of it's over your head, so you're wearing it over your head, but the rest of it's supposed to be draped down over your body. So if you take the rest of it and throw it over your shoulder, then you're not wearing it anymore. Now you're carrying it. So that's the example that Rashi is pointing to in our Gemara. And that's how we understand it. So that's if you took, Rashi says, if you took the hem of that garment and lifted up the bottom and carry it and put it on your arm, then it's like this Gemara that we see in Shabbat, where you have this garment that's on your head, and it's supposed to be over your whole body, but you're carrying it on your shoulder. So you also see that carrying is lav dafka on your arm, right? From the Gemara in Shabbat, it's not carrying doesn't mean that you have to have it in your hands. Carrying on Shabbat for the purposes of carrying in Reshut Rabin, it just means that it's on your body in a way it's not functioning as a garment. So here also. So this is how Rashi understands what Rav and Shmuel are saying. Right? So you're allowed to pass through water on Shabbat as long as you don't take your arm from underneath the chaluk. So Rashi, and as I say, it's a kind of an awkward language, or at least it seems to me. In other words, it's a strange language. You can't take your hand out from under the hem of your garment, because again, like you have to consider what does that mean? Why would you do that? What would it mean? But it seems that Rashi's Perush seems to be based on this idea that why would you take your hand out from underneath your garment would be to somehow protect the garment when you're going to be walking through the water. So the azara is to not do that, even though you'll be tempted to do it because you'll be walking through water. Later, not today, but later we'll see there are other perushim in this Gemara, but I just want to go with Rashi's perush. So Rashi says it's a problem of havara, right? Havara b'shuta rabim. You're not allowed to, but it's not really b'shuta rabim, as we pointed out. When you're walking through the water, you'll be carrying, but you'll be carrying in a carmelit, because the body of water itself is a carmelit. But nonetheless, of course, you're not allowed to carry in a carmelit in the same way you're not allowed to carry in a reshuta rabim. So that was Rav Shmuel Damri Charvayu, and then we had the Ikad Amri that said that Rav Shmuel Bar Rav Yehuda said essentially the same thing, but in the name of a Braita. I'm going to digress. Well, not digress. I want to show you
Shale,
Yeah.
if you have a bridge, is
Mhm.
that okay? You don't go through the Carmelite?
So the bridge itself,
What does the bridge mean?
the
You
bridge,
cross the bridge, yeah.
the bridge itself might be a Carmelite, or it might be a Reshut Rabim. That'll depend on the specifics of the bridge. But let's say if we think of a small bridge, it's going to be really a Carmelite.
So it doesn't help if you cross the bridge over the canal or something like this.
Well, what does it help? Because the whole reason we got into this discussion is because of Yom Kippur, right? That you're not allowed to carry, you're not allowed to go through water on Yom Kippur. So the reason we get into the discussion is there are exceptions to that. You're allowed to expose yourself to water, like you're allowed to have water on your body on Yom Kippur under certain special circumstances.
But today, if you're having a roof just around the town, and you cross the bridge is over, crosses a river. What does that mean?
So then it's not relevant that it's going over a river. It won't be relevant if you're within an eruv. It's not going to be relevant. It might be relevant if you're not within an eruv, right? Then I would say then it'll have a din of a Carmelite, most likely. It'll have a din of a Carmelite, and then you'll have whatever, right? But here we get into this whole issue because of going through water. I'm going to take a moment. So this din, by the way, of going through water. So we're just, and I'm doing this a little bit out of order. I was gonna wait, but I'll show you, just to show you a little bit from later halacha, what the Shulchan Aruch says about some of the things we've talked about so far. So here, interestingly, it's easy for you to remember the siman in the Shulchan Aruch. It's siman taryag in the Orach Chaim, and just as a matter of fact. So Isur Chitza b'Yom Kippur, Asur lechotz b'Yom Kippurim, Bein Chamin, right? Everybody sees this, yeah. We make it a little bit bigger. Okay, so you're not allowed to wash in Yom Kippur, whether it's in hot water, whether it's in cold water, even to put, afil lo shitetz ba'o b'mayim asur. You're not allowed to even put your finger into water on Yom Kippur. Right, so this fits into what we've understood until now, that the idea of exposing yourself to water on Yom Kippur in principle is asur, the imayu yadav, but now we'll get into the exceptions. Imayu yadav raglav shar gufo meluflachim betita b'tzoah, o shenataf dam mechot mo, you had a bloody nose, mutar l'rochtzam, then you're allowed to wash off dirt. You're allowed to wash off something that, like blood or something like that, you're allowed to wash off. Shelo asru ela rechitza shel ta'anug. So here the Shulchan Aruch says plain. What's the Yisur of rechitza? The Yisur is of ta'anug. Notel adam yadav shacharit u'mevarech al natilat yadayim. So now we see halacha l'maaseh. These are all things we've discussed in the sugya so far. So it says, but in the morning, one washes their hands in the morning and says the bracha for washing in the morning. But the difference is, on a normal morning, you're supposed to wash up to your wrist. On Yom Kippur, you only wash up to the end, to the beginnings of your fingers. You only wash up till there. And you should have in mind that you're not you're not washing for pleasure. You're only washing because you have to be ma'avir ruach ra'ah. Similarly, im hitil mayim v'shifshef biyado or asatzuracha v'kineach mutar lechotz. So if you went to the bathroom, hitil mayim, right? So if you had to urinate, and then your hand maybe got some of the urine on it, or if asatzuracha, so you had to defecate and you had to wipe yourself. Mutar lechotz, the havalei yadav meluchachot. Those are examples of people who have dirty hands. And here the Ramah says, similarly, when you wash under those circumstances, so again, you only wash up to the tips of the beginnings of your fingers. If you're coming to daven, right? Because you're also supposed to wash before you daven. Which I'll just digress on this for, I'm sorry. It's interesting to me, at least I see it here in the States, and I think also to some degree in Israel. It seems to me that in Israel, most shuls have a place to wash before you go into the shul proper. And so I think people do tend to wash before they daven. And in the States, because of the way shuls are built, they don't necessarily have that right before you go in. And so I see most people don't wash before they daven. It's just an interesting note. I don't know if you've noticed this also. But anyway, it doesn't matter. If right? So the Kohen is going to do Birkat Kohanim, he's going to duchen, as they say in Yiddish. He has to also wash, Afapi Shehen Tahorot, the whole road Rechitza Shena Mechavein Balatanug Mutara. Right? As long as your intention isn't for pleasure, it's actually permitted. So in other words, the idea is the Kohen ha'olad right the duchan notel yadav achapi shein tahorot. Why are the Kohen's hands? How does he know that the Kohen's hands are tahorot? Because of what we just said. Because the Kohen is going to the duchan had washed his hands for tefillah. So they're tahorot. In other words, tahara lav dafka in the most extreme sense, but in the most basic sense, they're tahorot legabei tefillah, right? So the assumption is before the Kohen came into daven, he washed his hands. So you might say that then on Yom Kippur, maybe he doesn't wash his hands again to do the Birkat Kohanim. But because there's a halacha for him to wash his hands before he does the Birkat Kohanim, so he also washes. Again, as long as it's not l'tanug. If he comes from a journey, right? Comes in from the road, I should say, just comes in from the road, and his legs are dirty. This is what kehot literally means, like they're dark, but they're dark from the dust and the dirt of walking outside. You're also allowed to wash off your legs. These are things we didn't get into yet, but since we're here, we'll just do this halacha. So somebody who's an Easternis, right? Somebody who's frail, and his mind will not be at ease until he wipes his face with water. It's permitted. So for the Easternis, this isn't really mishum ta'anug. This is somebody who is, let's say, frail, or they're very used to, they in order to feel normal, they have
anesthete.
Yeah, it could be. Yeah. Let's leave it at that, right? But it's reasonable. V'nagu b'zeh, right? The Ramah says v'nagu b'zeh lahachmir. The minhag is to be machmir, but feel b'tzat einayim, even to wash your eyes. Shiktzat refuah. In other words, because when you wake up in the morning, you have the gunk in your eyes. That's what he's talking about, and that's ktzat refuah. It's a little bit, just for health purposes. But nahagu lahachmir, right? Ashkenazim were knowing to be machmir, to not wash your face on Yom Kippur, even if you are going to feel not normal by doing it. You're not allowed to wash your mouth out on Yom Kippur, and that's talked about elsewhere. And here I wanted to show you this is the way the Shulchan Aruch paskins the sugya until now that we've done. Holech leveit midrash, o lahakbil pnei aviv, o rabo, o misha gadol mimenu b'chochma. Right, he makes it clear that misha gadol mimenu is somebody who's greater than him b'chochma, o l'tzarchei mitzvah, or for the purpose of a mitzvah. In other words, so we extrapolate from the Gemara that if you're going to do a mitzvah, so it starts off with the first thing he brings is Haloech lebeit midrash. So you're going to learn, or you're going to greet your father, or your Rebbe, or somebody who's greater than you in the Chokhmah, or for the purpose of a mitzvah. Yachol lavor b'mayim ad tzavaro. He's allowed to go through water up to his neck, bein b'halicha, bein b'chazara, whether going or whether coming back. Right, so as long as it's in this context of doing a mitzvah, so then you're allowed to go and come back. And so we understand the Gemara talked about going and coming back to go to the shiur. And they said, so what about going and coming back to greet your father or greet your Rebbe? So the Shulchan Aruch says that's all the same because they're all divrei mitzvah. Uvavat shelo yotzi yadav mitachet tzvat chaluko lahagbia shulei chaluko al zroo. Right, and that's the part we just did now. This is as long as the water isn't rushing. So this is the sugya that we're about. It's the next part of the sugya that we're about to do. In other words, you're not allowed to go into a rushing river because it's dangerous. Even if the water only comes up to your waist. So that's the sugya we're going to do next, which we'll look at in a second. 1 second.
Sorry, this is when I'm doing a shiur in a semi-public place. When I'm in a semi-public place, I get called away.
Oh, I didn't realize you were. I saw you weren't at home, but I didn't know exactly where you were.
What has sakana to do with Yom Kippur? Sakana is always sakana.
Yes, exactly. So now let's take a look. The sakana aspect is because it's always there. Exactly. It's not an issue of Yom Kippur. It's an issue in general. Let's take a look at this next. It's getting late, so I don't think we're going to do this quite as in depth as I planned, but we'll do it more in depth next week. Let's read now the next part of the sugya, and that's where we'll finish up. Matkifla Rav Yosef. So Rav Yosef attacks this contention that we have until now. It says that you're allowed to go through water up until your neck. And he says, Ubechol ki hai gavna mi share, on chol in such a in such a way, is that permitted? In other words, on chol, is it permitted to go through water up till your neck? Or, right, because he puts it in the form of a rhetorical question. The implication is it shouldn't be permitted even on chol, and certainly not on Yom Kippur, to go through water up to your neck. Why? So now he brings this those of you who did this, right? You read through Yechezkel. He brings a proof from Yechezkel. This whole thing is very interesting. As I said, I want to spend time on it next week. But for the moment, let's just read. So Rav Yosef says, to go through water up to your neck, how could, even on chol, that should be not permitted, because we see it says in Yechezkel, Vayamad elef b'ama vayevireinu b'mayim me afsayim, mikan shemutar lavor ad afsayim. So let's take a second and look at at least the first psukim in context. So this is Yechezkel Mem Zayin. So this is in the wake of Yechezkel having the vision of the way the Beit HaMikdash will look in the future. He has this vision, but he's being led by a malach around the compound of the Beit HaMikdash. In the beginning of Perek Mem Zayin, it says, "Vayishiveni al petach habayit." He brings me back to the opening of the bayit of the Beit HaMikdash. Mayim yotzim mitachad miftan habayit kadima. Water is coming out from the threshold of the house eastward. Kifnei habayit kadim, because the face of the Beit HaMikdash is eastward. V'mayim yordim mitachad miketef habayit hayemanit minegev lamizbeach. Right, so and the water is going out from the shoulder of the house on the right, which is south of the Mizbeach. So if you remember the surot of the Beit HaMikdash I showed you, I'll have another one for next week. But so the water's it's starting out from the southern side of the Beit HaMikdash, but it's coming out now from the threshold of the front of the Beit HaMikdash. ויוצאיני דרך שער צפונה, ויסיבני דרך חוץ, על שער החוץ, דרך הפונה קדים, והנה מים מפקים מן הכתף הימנית. I'm not going to go into all the details of the geography here, but the water is trickling. Mifakim, as we'll see, means trickling out. It's the way water comes out of a pach, right, which is a cruet or a small pitcher. So the water is trickling out from the south side. And then the man is this malach that's showing all these things to Yechezkel. So the man comes out eastward, the kav biyado, he has a measure in his hand. Vayamad elef ba'ama, he measures 1,000 amot. Vayavireinu b'mamim me afsayim. He's bringing me through water of Saim, water of Saim, which Rashi says means water up to the ankles. Ephes in Tanakh doesn't necessarily mean zero, but it would, in this case, it would mean lower. It's like the lowest water. So it's water up to his ankles. Vayamad Elef.
Actually, in Tanakh, there's no concept of zero.
Well, not zero, though, not a mathematical.
I mean mathematical zero. Yes.
Not necessarily, but I'm just pointing out linguistically, Ephes, the way we use it in modern Hebrew to mean zero or mean nothing, it's based on this idea that it can mean something like the very minimum of or the lower part. In this context, it means the lower or the lowest, let's say. So now there's water that's coming out of the Beit HaMikdash, and the Yechezkel is being led by this malach, who has literally measured 1,000 amot from the opening of the Beit HaMikdash, and he's walking through, he's leading Yechezkel to walk through this water, which is just up to his ankles. And then he measures Pasuk Daled, Vayamad Elef Vayavirena b'mayim mayim birkayim. Now he measures another 1,000 amot, and now he's bringing you through water that goes up to the knees. Vayamad Elef Vayavirena meimad naim. Then he does another 1,000, and now the water is up to the hips, right, to the waist. Vayamad Elef Nachal Asher Lo Uchal La'avur. He measures another 1,000, and it's a Nachal, it's a stream that I cannot pass through. Ki Ga'u Hamayim Meisachu, because the waters have increased to Meisachu. Nachal Asher Lo Ye'aver. A nachal that cannot be passed through. So these are the psukim that we're going to that the Gemara is going to refer to now. So what do we see? The malach leads him through water that goes up to his ankles, water goes up to his knees, and then water goes up to his waist. But once it gets to this, to the 4,000th, right? The fourth 1,000 amot, now the water is a nachal that he can't go through. So the implication that Rabbi Yosef is going, as we'll see, Rabbi Yosef is going to derive from this is, you could go, even on chol, you're allowed to go through water up to your waist. But once the nachal is above that, then you shouldn't go through it anymore. Let's go back to the Gemara. Matkifla Rav Yosef, v'chol ki ha'gavna mishari v'aktiv, v'yamad elef b'ama v'evirin v'mayim me'afsayim. So Rav Yosef stops. He says, "Mikan shemutar lavor ad afsayim." So this teaches you you're allowed to go through water that goes up to your ankles. Rashi says, "So Yamad Elef Hamalach Herad Yechezkel Nachal Yotzei MiBeit Kodesh HaKodeshim." This malach has shown Yechezkel this stream that's coming out of the Kodesh HaKodeshim. Tchilato Kechut v'Holech v'Gadel. The beginning, this is from a little bit later on, but it starts off. The Gemara is going to expound on this a little bit more, and it says it starts off as just a very, very thin stream. The Gemara will say later on it's kekarnei chagavim. It's like the antenna of a grasshopper. V'kol elef ama orech mishiatza chutz Yerushalayim lo haya amok ela me'afsayim. So saying this 1,000 is beginning from the time he actually leaves Yerushalayim. He's walking out of the Beit HaMikdash, and now he's leaving Yerushalayim. So the first 1,000 is Mei Afsaim, Mei Kartsulin, or as we would say, Marim Kartsulaim. It's up to the ankles. Vayamad Elef, Vayirena b'mayim mayim birkayim. Mikan shemutar lavor ad birkayim. So this tells you you're allowed to go through water up until the knees. Vayamad elef vayavrina me'matnayim. Mikan shemutar lavor ad matnayim. Mikan ve'ilach vayamad elef nachal asher lo uchal lavor. Mikan ve'ilach, Rashi says, karile asher lo uchal lavor. From here on, more than me'matnayim. Now I'm going to say, there the pasuk says, this is water that I can't pass through. Alma, so this teaches us, asur la'avur l'ma'ala mi'matnayim. You're not allowed to pass through water that's higher than your waist. Amar Abaye, so Abaye says, Shani Nachal, D'Redife Mai. So Rav Yosef is bringing this as a question. What was his question?
That even during Chol, forget about Yom Kippur, but in general, that you're not allowed to cross a river up to your neck.
Exactly. He brings this proof from Yechezkel. So the implication is that he says, you shouldn't be allowed to do this even on Chol, certainly not on Yom Kippur. So Abaye says a nachal is different to Redife Mai because the water is running, or you can think of it Redife. It's a little bit of a play on words. It's a rapids, right? It's the water is rushing. The water is rushing, so that's why. That's why the malach. That's why Yechezkel, I should say, said he couldn't go through this water. It wasn't just because of the height. It was, as the pasuk describes it. The pasuk says it's a nachal. And a nachal is redife maya. The water is rushing. Again, mikan v'ha. I'm just going to read, and then I want to discuss this whole thing next time. Yachu yavirena b'sichui. Talmud lomar ki ga'u hamayim meisachu. So it could be that he should be able to pass through the sichui. Sichui here is going to mean by swimming, like schia in Hebrew. Talmud Lomar. So in other words, why doesn't he swim? Right? So granted he can't walk through this water now, and granted it's a nachal and the water is rushing. But why can't he swim? Talmud Lomar ki ga'u hamayim meisachu, because the water has swelled to meisachu. My meisachu. So what does it mean meisachu? Shiyuta. Shekain korin l'shaita siacha. So what's meisachu? Shiyuta. That shiyuta here would mean to swim or to float on the water. Because shiata is called siacha, right? It's another way of saying siacha, which is sichui, which is like to swim or to float on the water. I'll bring you a little bit more about the language of this next time. But there's a Mishnah, if you learn in Beitza, one of the things you're not allowed to do on Yom Tov is lashut opnei hamayim. It's the same word, lashut, and it apparently means to swim or to float. And I say that because in modern Hebrew you might limit the meaning a little bit more. Anyway, Yachu yavirena beburni ktana. So, okay, granted, he can't walk through this water, he can't swim through the water, he can't float through the water, but maybe he could pass over it in a small boat. Talmud Lamar bal telech bo ani shayit. I have a different pasuk from Yeshaya that says you can't go through it, or you can't go in it. Ani here is like ani, like an aniyah, like a ship of oars, a ship or a floating ship, or a ship that's propelled by oars. Yachu yavirena beburni gdola. So maybe you can go through in a large ship. Talmud Lamar v'tzia. This is the hemshech of the pasuk in Yeshaya there. V'tzi adir lo yavirena. Tzi here means a large ship. In modern Hebrew, we use it to mean like a fleet of ships, but a tzi is just a large ship. My mashma. What's the implication? Kidimitagem Rav Yosef, like the way Rav Yosef translated that pasuk in Yeshaya that said, "Lo tazil be b'sfinat sayadin." You can't go through, go in it in a ship of hunters, or burni rabti lo taguzena, and a large ship should not cut through it, should not go through it. Anyway, it's a little bit obscure. You're all invited to look at this. You have English translation, you have Steinsaltz and so forth. We'll look at it a little bit more next time. The whole thing is fascinating. I'm going to leave you though with, just for this time, I just go back for a second to the Shulchan Aruch. This is what the Shulchan Aruch is basing this on when it says, talking about going through water on Yom Kippur, he says, "V'hu shelo yiyu hamayim rotfin." You're allowed to go through it as long as it's not rushing water. Din kain af b'chol asur mipnei hasakana. Because if that would be so, if it's rushing water, even on chol, it would be forbidden because it's dangerous. Afil imena magim ela ad matnayim, even if it only came up to your waist. That which it is permitted to go through water to do this mitzvah that he just described. It's to go through the water in your own body. But to pass over the water in a small ship, it would also mean like a raft or something like that. That's forbidden. And we start to see the basis for that from the Gemara that we just read. And now, harav asur la'avur b'mayim kedei le'elech etzel tamida. Right, so that was our conclusion also from the Gemara, that we didn't, in the end, we didn't have a proof that would allow the Rav to go to the Talmid on Yom Kippur. So the psak is, Rav is not allowed to go to the Talmid on Yom Kippur. Haholech lishmor perutav mutar la'avur b'mayim. If you're going to guard one's fruit, right, your fruit on Yom Kippur, you're allowed to go through water bahalicha. You're allowed to walk through the water, aval lo b'chazara, but you're not allowed to go back. Again, the same. These are things that we understood. They were implied in the Gemara. The Rama says, "V'chol makom shemutar lavor b'mayim afil hayalo derech sheyachol lakip yabasha mutar lavor l'ma'et b'hiluch adif tzvei." The Rama adds this in, right, that even if you have a way of going to wherever you're going, not by going through water, but the more direct route is to go through water. You're allowed to go through the water because it's better to reduce the amount that you're walking on Yom Kippur. The next part that what he talks about, that's going to be the next part of the sugya. So it's the name of the titlach. We'll talk about that not next time. Next time. So if you have time, if you read the psukim in Yechezkel Matov, if you read that whole parak Matov, if you read the pasuk in context in Yeshaya Matov, I want to talk about it next time because the whole proof of Rav Yosef is really interesting, that he wants to prove from this vision of Yechezkel that one is not allowed to walk through water above their waist, even on chol. It's a fascinating thing, at least to me, and we'll leave it for next time. But anyway,
Shel?
Yes.
There really seems to be a difference between two kinds of waterways. There are rivers and there are canals. And the river is the Nahal and the canal is the Nahar. Yechezkel was living on the Nahar Kvar, And we know that he was living on the canal because they found the place where the Jews were living. Those
Ah, yeah.
who,
Wow, okay.
yeah, they are luchot, they are tablets, yes, they found there with the text. There was an exposition in the Museum Tanakh a few years ago about that place, and they showed the tablets, and they know where the place was. And this is a place where there were many canals.
Where there were many canals, right? So in other words, like that were made what?
Irrigation canals. Yeah.
So you see, very interesting. So I imagine Museum Tanakh, they're saying that was from the time of the Galut Rishona, right? It's from
yes, of the Galut Rishona, because the tablets were written partly in how do you say, cuneic form.
Uniform, yes.
Yes, and there were also Hebrew explanations on the
margin.
Misaviv,
Yeah.
Lashulaim.
Yeah.
And that was the time that in Babylon they still wrote in with the cuneic forms, but later on everybody was maybe 50 or years later. They stopped writing on cuneic forms on the tablets, and they used the Aramaic letters. Or everybody, not only the Jews.
Right, 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 and that's when the Jews adopted the what we call the Ktav Ashuri.
Yes, that's the yes.
Right.
Instead of the Rat's letters, they adopted the Aramaic letters.
Yafeh.
האותיות המרובעות.
Right, and the Rat's letters are also the Talmud talks about. You must have seen the Talmud talks about Rat's. So, thank you. Very interesting. It's really, the whole thing is very interesting. And again, just in terms of the context of our Gemara, so that's the realia, which I really appreciate. And you have to ask, but what I'm asking is, so how does Rav Yosef derive these halachot from this vision? Just something to think about. We can understand it kipshuta, but nonetheless, something to think about.
How could he imagine that there was a nachar about the Beit HaMikdash? It could have been a canal. Also, I think the canal would come to my house because it's too big. It's huge.
You're about 4,000. Yeah, that's time, right? That would make it. That would make sense. Maybe you're living in a very auspicious place, right? In Arnona. Yafeh. So we'll see. Oh, wait a second. So next week, I'm glad I stopped on this for a second. Hold on.
When is Tisha B'Av? When is Tisha B'Av?
So Tisha B'Av is going to be a week from tomorrow, or it'll be a week from. No, it was Leil
2 weeks. 2 weeks.
2 weeks from tomorrow.
Leil Tisha B'Av is in 2 weeks. Wait, today is the 12th. Okay, but hold on a second. I'm traveling next week. So next week, I'll be getting on a plane just about the time that I usually give shiur. So we will not meet next week. And then the following week, it's going to be Leil Tisha B'Av. So we're gonna miss 2 weeks unless I figure out a way of doing another shiur in the between, which I would coordinate with you, but for the moment I can't think of it. So okay, we'll leave it.
You come back to Israel, or you are traveling inside the States?
No, I'm coming to Israel for just 10 days. I had so my daughter gave birth early. I have a granddaughter. Thank you.
Mazal tov.
So originally I planned this trip around. I was supposed to, the idea of coming next week was it was supposed to be a few days after her due date. but the baby decided that the due date was a week early. Babies are like that.
So you'll be back in time for the bris, or?
Well, since it's a baby girl, no.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's a guy.
You're off the hook.
The baby's off the hook. I'm okay anyway. Anyway, so yeah, but I have
So,
other
so
things.
it has the baby has a name. If you already,
Yes, right. So the baby was born on Motzei Shabbat, so she got a name on Yom Sheni, Yael Esther.
Hmm.
And I have yet to hear exactly why they chose the name, but I'm sure that it was all for a very good reason. But it's a nice name. It's a beautiful name, beautiful girl, beautiful name. Very happy. Everyone is well, which is the important thing.
happy grandfather.
Thank you. You know what it's a nice feeling. So yeah, I'll be in, and but I have, aside from seeing my family and meeting my new granddaughter, I have some other things to take care of. But hopefully I will not have to move out of my apartment. So that will be a little bit of a relief. Okay, so I won't see you maybe for 3 weeks, but I'm going to try to, I don't want it to go for such a long time. I'm going to try to figure out how to supplement maybe at least one other time in between. We'll see if we can do something. But in the meantime, have a good rest of your week. Shabbat Shalom. And Kol Tov.
יישר
Thank
כוח
you.
ונסיעה
Good
טובה.
night.
See you, Toba. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.